you are now CEO of your own health, and you have to advocate for yourself in the system.
Welcome to the Global Travel Channel podcast show. I'm your host, Mark Philpott, and today I have another great guest lined up. How can the words cancer and travel go together? Well, if you've had cancer or you know somebody who has, then my guest today will leave you feeling inspired. She's doing something remarkable and selfless. It's time to introduce to the Global Travel Channel podcast show, Pat Wetzel. So, Pat, welcome to the Global Travel Channel podcast show today.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here.
It's lovely to have you, and we've got to tell our audience that this is our second go at doing this because you were very ill the first time we tried to do this, and it's great to hear you sounding so much better today.
Oh, yeah, I had a bit of a cold or something, but I'm all beyond that now, or mostly beyond it.
Fantastic to hear. Now, for the sake of all of my listeners, whereabouts in the world are you chatting to us from today?
I'm in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Santa Fe, New Mexico. Wonderful. And you must be coming into the early evening over there at this time. So are you having a lovely evening?
Oh, it's always beautiful here. The weather's incredible.
Now, I offer my guests the opportunity to dedicate the particular show that they're on with me to someone special in their life. So who would you like to dedicate this particular show to?
Oh, gosh, I don't have a clue. Let me dedicate it to my dear friend, Robin McGee up in Canada, who has been through just so much with her cancer experience.
Okay, so Robin, this show is for you, and I hope you're all doing well up there in Canada, and I'm sure we're going to be hearing a lot of wisdom and inspiration from Pat throughout the show. So Robin, this one's for you. Now, Pat, I usually try and throw a bit of a curveball to my listeners when they start off, and as you are an experienced podcast guest, you'll be able to handle this one no problem at all, I'm sure. So my question was going to be today, I have a lot of listeners across the world who love the sport of squash, and I know that you've got some history there, so I'd like to know what's your view on the squash program at the University of Pennsylvania. Do you remember back then?
I do. It's been a few years, but I fell in love with squash. It's such a great game. And back then we had both an English ball and an American ball. And the American ball was much faster, and it was just a fabulous game. We would actually go up to Canada and play up there over Christmas break to get in shape for our season, and then come back to the States.
So we're talking about a highly competitive squash player in yourself, were you, or what?
Well, I managed to make the national rankings, but I was at the very bottom. But nevertheless, I'm pleased with that.
And are you still playing today?
No, I'm not playing anymore, unfortunately, but I have a lot of fond memories.
Yeah, well, that's good. Well, I thought I'd throw that one out there, and you, as I said, you handled it very, very well. Now, today's subject is about cancer and some of the phenomenal things that you have done and are continuing to do in that space. But why don't we start back in the beginning? Because in 2009, you got some fairly bad and sad news. Can you tell us about what happened around that time in your life?
Yeah, actually, in 2009, I was at a swanky resort outside of San Francisco, Half Moon Bay, at a private equity conference. And I mean, it's a beautiful setting. You know, they have Adirondack chairs around private fire pits overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It's just spectacular. And I got terribly sick, so sick I almost couldn't get home. But I got home and I never cleared up. So I finally went to see a doctor, and an ENT doctor actually, because my nodes were up in my neck. And he said, "You have lymphoma." And I said, "What's that?" "I do not. Just give me some antibiotics. I never take drugs, so surely that'll, clear everything up." Well, he was right, I was wrong, and a biopsy showed that I did have lymphoma.
How was that emotionally to hear that news? What were some of the things that went through your mind in that very early stages of hearing that?
Well, the early stage of this was really up and down in that I was initially diagnosed. I did not want to do chemo, so I did an enormous amount of research, and I found a clinical trial at Stanford that I wanted to do. It was a vaccine-based trial. I got my oncologist to open the door for me. I applied to the trial, and I was down in wine country for a long weekend, actually, and I missed a message from my oncologist. And the message on my phone said, "Stanford has rejected you. You have a different type of cancer. Call the office on Monday." So I just put months of hope and effort and everything into trying to determine this course for treatment, and the rug was pulled right out from underneath me.
Wow. What did you do then? How was the emotional impact of that? I imagine it must have been pretty savage and brutal to be told that news over the
It
phone.
was
Yeah.
not fun. I found out that I had a much rarer type of lymphoma,
Mm.
and that it was so rare there would really be no research or anything done on it. So it would just be treated as a general follicular lymphoma.
Yeah. Now, what happened in that period of your life in terms of support from friends and family, and how did you deal with it? Was it something that you wanted to deal with more alone and go through it, or were you in the in the clutches of having lots of support networks around you and reaching out to support networks?
A little bit of both, actually. And I went through 3 rounds of chemo. I mean, my cancer has come back, and I've had to treat it. So the saga of relationships has really suffered a lot. The first round, I was a very active tennis player. The first round, I had a lot of support, but I wasn't really well after the chemo. And it started to shake out that nobody really wanted to play with you if you couldn't win.
Mm.
There was one wonderful person who stepped up and was willing to play doubles with me. She carried us, there was no question about it, but it was an incredible act of kindness on her part.
Mm.
The second round of chemo, by then the tennis people, nobody wanted to be near me because I wasn't winning. Unfortunately, that's kind of what it comes down to. And it just takes a toll on relationships. I had a 5-year relationship that fell apart.
Mm.
I found support in areas I didn't expect, and I found people I thought would be there were not. And I think that's a pretty common experience.
How did it start? How did it start to change you from inside when you started to have those experiences with those other people that you thought, maybe some of them you thought, well, I can trust you, but in the end it didn't work out that way. How did that change you towards your position with other people?
It's stunning, actually. It's very hurtful. And you just have to reach deep and realize that you have the strength to go through this. And it's really up to you to weather it one way or the other. At least that was my approach. I don't have a large or close family of any sort. So really the dealing with this was on me.
Were you naturally a strong person before you got cancer, or is it something that's even, obviously it's made you stronger, but were you somebody who could take this head on without too much fluctuation in your emotions, or did it really impact you from a sensitive point of view?
I'm just stubborn. I get through things.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay, so you took it head on.
Pretty much, yeah. There's not a lot of option.
Hmm.
You do your research and your homework. You have your hands full managing a lot of the side effects and things of that sort. And for me, it sent me on a quest for health. I mean, what really creates anti-cancer health? What do you control? Going through cancer is such an uncontrollable situation
Hmm.
that I think people search for what they do control. And I think that is one of the things that certainly guided me.
Did you find that there was a lot of confusing and conflicting information out there about cancer?
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm.
And there are groups and companies that want to sell you false hope. And you have to be really careful and thoughtful because you can find yourself in a fairly desperate frame of mind. Certainly when my cancer reoccurred, I was grasping a little bit and I could see how some things were very seductive. But I'm pretty smart, I'm pretty analytical, and I found a path that worked for me. But I really, I think it's really inappropriate that there are some groups that really prey on people's fear
Hmm.
as they're going through this type of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. How long did it take you to get to that stage where you felt as though you were on top of it and things were going to get better for you?
No, never.
Mm, mm,
Well, I mean, you get through it. I think the real trick is learning to live intensely in the present moment. Because in the present moment, you can't have fear about the future, you can't have regret about the past, you're just here now. And it took me a lot of years to really learn to do that on a very regular basis because I live with the fear of recurrence if I let myself. And while it's never far from my mind, I don't want to live my life that way.
yeah, good. Now we fast forward to 2017, and you made a decision at that stage to really change your life. Can you share with us what happened around that?
Yeah, Actually, let me back up a little bit. I started another website, Anti-Cancer Club.
Okay.
In 2016, it had well over 20 million impressions on Twitter. The reason I was growing it was that I'd also designed a technology platform that modeled and rewarded human compassion. But I'm not a programmer. I went down to the Bay Area to raise money for it. I got some interest. I thought, the notion of human compassion was kind of a global market. And I hired a technology group that was associated with this investor group to do the actual programming for me for a beta platform. But they didn't provide anything. I waited and I waited. I called, I emailed. They refused to communicate. I finally got my lawyers on it, and they came back and said, well, they've registered all your intellectual property with the U.S. Patent Office. Your only option is to sue them. It'll cost you in increments of $500,000, take at least 3 years of your life, and there's no guaranteed outcome because everybody steals intellectual property in Silicon Valley.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Yes, unbelievable. Stealing the intellectual property of a cancer patient. These were really class people.
Yeah, right.
But I looked at it. I didn't have increments of $500,000. I had several $100,000 at this point invested in the whole thing. I'd had it. I was disgusted. I was incredibly stressed. I had to fire people. One person had to file for bankruptcy. I had to close the company down. I was losing hair from stress, not from chemo.
Yep.
And vomiting blood. I mean, I was really sick. And I went to see my oncologist, and he just sat there and laid out a list of possible tests and all the things that could be going wrong with me. And I left that office and I thought, I'm just not going down this route. This is just depressing and dreadful. And I decided to sell my house and go travel. And that's how Cancer Roadtrip started.
Yeah, amazing. Now, what was the connection in particular to travel? Was it something you traveled a lot previously in your life and you thought travel was going to be something that would first relax you and de-stress you from the current situation you found yourself in at around that time? Was that the goal of it?
Yeah, partly just a major reset. But I grew up traveling. My family would spend several months a year, mostly in Europe. My uncle, when I was a child, was with the Sixth Fleet, which was stationed in the south of France. So we'd spend some summers there, travel to Italy and Greece and whatnot. So traveling for me was always a happy time. And I think I associate travel and adventure with happiness.
Interesting. And with the decision in 2017 to start Cancer Roadtrip, what was the goal right from the beginning with that?
I didn't know. I just knew that I was hitting the road.
Yep.
I needed a major reset. I needed to reflect. I needed to figure out what I was going to do, and I may as well write about it.
Fantastic. Where did you go to first?
First, I was lucky enough to have some friends, offer me a house up on Vashon Island because I thought I would go to Hawaii, but by the time my house sold and everything closed, everything was booked, or it was $20,000 a week. It was so expensive. I thought, this is just going to kill my budget. So the house on Vashon Island opened up, and I went up there for, I forget how long now, several weeks. And it was a wonderful place to catch my breath.
I bet. How was that first period of time where you actually sold the house and you were, let's say, inverted commas, free to go and do whatever you wanted to do? How were you feeling at that stage?
Probably a little lost. I really did not know where I was going to go or what I was going to do. And events started unfolding. I had some incredible serendipity and luck with a number of things. But the first few months were just a matter of wondering, what am I going to do?
Where did you think that serendipity came from?
Well, the first bit of real serendipity, there were numerous things. I house sat for a beautiful house just off the water up in north of Seattle, just stunning. That was a bit of serendipity, certainly. But I had also applied to the NASA outreach program as a blogger to go to the Cassini finale when the Cassini plummeted down to, and I was accepted.
Right.
And I'm I'm a pilot, I'm a space buff. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to NASA. This is so cool.
Yeah.
And that was one of those things that was just like, wow. And I think that somewhere around that point, really good things started lining up and happening. I mean, there were ups and downs, but I started to feel like I was in this flow of goodwill.
Do you put that down to putting yourself out there in the universe as a figure of speech? Do you think you were, because you were being open about where you were going, what you were doing, that these things actually happened to you?
Yes, I think that having no expectations and being intensely present opens up amazing doors.
So I'm going to talk about a little bit longer about the advice that you'd pass on to others that are diagnosed. But at this stage of your journey, was it something that was difficult to make in terms of decisions, or you sound like a person that once you've made a decision, you just go for it anyway? But that's not always the case with everybody. So how would you suggest other people take on that
Oh, I
decision
would
making
not do
process?
what I did. I mean, this is crazy. Who in the right mind would do this? I mean, this is like when I learned to fly. I was absolutely out of my mind, but it's one of the best things I ever did. And I find when I make these decisions that put myself in these situations where there's a bit of adventure, somehow it all works out.
So tell us about the background of your writing. Have you been somebody that's written for a long period of time?
Interestingly, when I was in college, I remember turning in an economics paper, and my professor gave me an A minus, and I asked why the minus, and he said, "You write beautifully, but you have nothing to say." And I thought, well, I'm 18 years old. What do you expect?
That's brilliant.
But everybody always thought I would write, and I did a lot of writing involved with some of my earlier jobs, but it was financial writing. It really wasn't until later in life that I kind of hooked back into this, and I really enjoy writing.
Had you done a lot of connection to travel blogging per se? Had you been somebody that had done a lot of research or read other people's travel blogs?
Oh God, not at all.
So it was something that came along as part of your newfound journey in life.
Well, most of all, somewhere along the line, I think it occurred to me, I was very lucky that I could afford to just do something like this.
Yes.
Cancer had certainly taken its financial toll big time, but I was still able to say, I have a budget, I'm going to go travel for a while and figure things out. Most people really can't do that. And I find travel to be a very healing experience. Along the way, it occurred to me, if I can travel to heal, why can't others? And that really set the goals for Cancer Roadtrip.
And how was your health when you started off on this journey? Where were you at in your cycle with the cancer?
In Hopefully in remission, but I didn't know. I was throwing up blood. I was really sick. I was stressed. I was really concerned that actually the cancer had come back, and if it followed the course it had previously during the last reoccurrence, I figured I had about 18 months. And I I had to think hard about whether or not I wanted to do any more chemo. It's just brutal. So I was just living really in no man's land. I did not know what would happen. And the stress of going for tests for me is just off the charts. In the cancer community, they call it scanxiety. Most people start getting nervous a few weeks before they have to go for scans or blood tests, and then they live on the ceiling until they get the results, and then they deal with it. And I just decided to take myself out of that whole cycle for a while.
So when you started traveling, you started to stop having checkups?
Yep.
Wow. So
I had no doctor, no oncologist. I just decided to go.
you removed yourself completely from the system.
Uh-huh.
Wow, extraordinary. And how long did it take you to start to feel different? And when I say different, I mean physically, emotionally, spiritually, everything.
It took some time. I think certainly being invited to NASA was a nice turning point for me. And along the way, I meditate every day. I've had a meditation practice for a long time. And I spent a lot of time really looking within myself and trying to figure out what did I need to do for me.
It sounds like you'd put a lot of focus on your life previously into helping others and doing things with huge goal orientation. This must have been a big step back for you to actually take a breath. Was it?
Um, yeah, I'm somebody who likes to have goals and I like to be involved in things. So this was a bit different, but one of the themes certainly running through my travel was what would I do next?
Did you have any stress associated with that? Like, were you always on top of yourself to come up with an idea on what was next?
Could you repeat that?
Yeah, what I was saying was when you started thinking about what was next in terms of goals, did you put additional stress on yourself to actually come up with an idea?
No, not stressed to come up with it. It just appeared. I thought, I look at, well, travel heals. Travel's great. It gets you out of your environment and opens up your world to possibilities. Everybody I know who's been through cancer could use a break, use a vacation. And you look at the web and the power of distribution we have, the power of story via video on the web is just incredible. And to me, it seemed natural to bring all this together in a film project, which is how Cancer Roadtrip has evolved. And then relocating to Santa Fe, there's a wonderful film community here. I have met incredible people. I have numerous filmmakers who want to get involved with this. They all have 5 Emmys and amazing credentials. So one thing after the other has just gradually fallen in place.
Now, you write about reimagining wellness. Can you explain to the audience what you mean by that?
I think wellness is partly psychological, partly spiritual, partly practical. Psychologically, we have control over our thoughts. What do we choose to think? I look at our lives from a health perspective, and I call it our matrix. What do we choose to think? Who do we choose to be with? What do we choose to eat? How do we choose to get exercise and be well? What do we choose spiritually? I think all those things come together to create health, and you can reimagine each and every piece of it. And it's up to you to decide how far you want to go with it.
Has that been something that's been a constant throughout your life? Like, for instance, how long have you meditated for in your life journey?
Oh no, I started meditating after cancer.
Mm.
I hit a point of such extreme stress that I realized my stress was managing me, I was not managing it, and I needed desperately to do something. So I took a sampler course, a meditation sampler course at the local museum, and the gentleman teaching it had studied under the Maharishi in Europe.
Mm.
So I ended up with a meditation teacher who had been meditating for 30 years, was very knowledgeable, and that got me into meditation. And I absolutely devoted myself to 2 sessions a day for many years.
Mm. Wonderful. How is that whole journey of Cancer Road Trip evolving when it comes to other people and going on trips and sharing this passion that you have for travel? How did that start to evolve from your initial travels?
Oh, I think when I first started off, I thought I didn't have a clue what I was doing, quite frankly, other than the idea that we could give healing retreats to people captured on film for education and inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be a fun way to travel the world and to look at different healing approaches in different cultures. I have been so fortunate to meet people who have helped to educate me, to refine my vision, to look at some practical considerations in terms of doing filming like this. I have no delusions of grandeur. I'm not. I'm kind of the executive producer. I'm hiring and bringing in the best people I can find who are incredibly talented to actually make this work. And we have almost decided on our first 7 travelers for next year for our first trip, and they are all remarkable people.
Can you give us some ideas on where those trips are going to be to?
Well, we have a few ideas. Right now, we're in the midst of bringing in corporate sponsors and fundraising. Once we hit a magic number, we can go ahead and make reservations. We're almost there, not quite. We had looked at certainly doing Santa Fe because it's a very beautiful and very woo kind of place in terms of healing modalities. A lot of ancient history here and things of that sort. I had also met a gentleman who owns a global river cruise and barge company, and he had a boat that was big enough to accommodate all of our 7 travelers plus our film crew, but small enough to get through the waterways in the south of France. So possibly doing a barge cruise through Provence is a possibility as well. And then it's open to the world. We could do a trip that focuses on Ayurvedic medicine. We could do a trip healing waters of Eastern Europe. We could do a trip that focuses on a specific type of cancer. And we're including caregivers in our audience. So we'll certainly be having some caregiver-only trips as well.
Is there any collaboration going on with cancer-based organizations across the US or the world in general?
Well, I have a lot of connections with cancer groups. Generally, in the not-for-profit space, people are very cautious because I think most not-for-profits view the world as limited. There's a limited number of money and they need to have their share. And I have a different mindset. I see the world as very unlimited. I don't see this as just in the cancer space. We're in travel, we're in wellness. And I bring a business approach to this as opposed to a traditional not for profit approach. So my business model is a social entrepreneurship model, and it's very different than anything that's out there. I see teaming up with cancer not-for-profits in the future, as particularly as we get into specific cancer areas. One of the ideas I had was actually to share revenue from the film with different cancer not-for-profits. But again, I'm very entrepreneurial, and I think a lot of organizations they do the same events every year. There's a way they do things, and I don't know how flexible they are in terms of doing something different to bring in revenue.
Have you considered taking this as a roadshow around different platforms and I guess sharing the vision beyond the corporate, not beyond the standard non-for-profit scene? I'm thinking in my head something like a TED Talk would be a great way to communicate this to a greater audience.
A TED Talk would be a wonderful way to communicate it. I am actually in touch with some of the TED people now, and we're thinking about also including some of the people who are involved with Cancer Road Trip in terms of doing TED Talks, because they're just a remarkable group of people.
Now, when you talk about the actual people that would go on these trips, we're talking about people that are currently diagnosed with cancer?
They're post-cancer treatment. Now, they may or may not be cured, or they may not know, but they're healthy enough to travel. They're not immunocompromised. They obviously are going to need a medical sign-off for this,
Yep.
but they're capable of traveling. One of the things that you find in cancer, there's the diagnosis phase, the treatment phase, then the longest phase, hopefully for most people, is this post-treatment area. And there is really nothing in our system in the US and in most countries that really helps you address the social, psychological, spiritual, physical issues that go with dealing with cancer. And I think that's partly because medicine, certainly in the States, is very interventional and they can do a very good job, but they're not oriented towards those human needs. And I think the way to address these sorts of human needs, because they're global needs, is through the power of story. I think by sharing stories, we can impart an enormous amount of wisdom. And the things that stories connect us emotionally. And it's emotion that really helps us transform. We don't transform intellectually. We transform emotionally and spiritually. So if we can touch people on that level, perhaps we can motivate them to find their own path.
Have you got your own book in situ with this in terms of documenting your own journey?
Well, my blog documents a lot of the journey, actually. So numerous people have said I should write a book, but right now I'm raising money, growing the social media, keeping the blog alive. I just got back from a trip to Africa with a Nikon ambassador where I learned an enormous amount about photography. I have so many things going on. The book is on the back burner.
I must say I enjoyed many of the photographs you posted online with your recent trip to Africa, and in particular the one of Kilimanjaro from the base. It looks a daunting climb, and you weren't able to take it on this time. But do you have any future plans to try and get up there?
Well, it's interesting. One of our guides for Cancer Road Trip, every trip has a guide, is Sean Swarner. And Sean's a remarkable man. He had two different types of childhood cancer, either of which should have killed him. But he survived both, but with one functional lung. So after a few years of trying to figure out what was he going to do, he decided he would climb Everest. So he did. And then he went and he climbed all the major peaks on all the continents. He went to the South Pole. Then he went to the North Pole last year, I think it was, last year or the year before, and he did an award-winning documentary film on that. So it was interesting. I got talking to Sean. I told him about Cancer Road Trip, and he said, count me in. And he said, let's do Kilimanjaro.
Yep.
And this was a year ago, and I was not in the best shape. I'd gotten out of shape. I'd put on some weight. And I thought, oh my gosh, if we do Kilimanjaro, I won't be able to go. I'm not in shape. So the last year, I've been working really hard to get back in shape. And with a little bit of extra training, I could do it now. So it might be on the agenda because some people learn through physically doing things.
Fantastic. Well, we'll stay tuned for that one to see whether you not only make it, which I'm sure you will, but to support you getting up there as well. Now, you're right about learning from the wisdom of other cultures. I'm interested to hear you explain a little bit more around this. Obviously, traveling opens us up to all sorts of different cultures, but what are some of the things that people going on these excursions with Cancer Roadtrip can expect to experience?
You know, a lot of thought has gone into this because we want to capture everybody's thoughts, and yet we also want to give them a truly personal and private healing journey. So as we look at this, we're looking at setting aside some time to do interviews and some group talks and setting aside time that's very private so they don't have cameras in their faces the whole time. Because it's really important to me that they have a personal journey that is meaningful when they go on a trip like this. I think we have so much to learn from other cultures. I think that here, I'll just say in the States, we've become so electronically addicted, we're emotionally disconnected. People drive home in suburbia, the garage door goes up, the garage door goes down. They can sit in front of the tube and order fake food. This is not the way we're meant to live as humans. And I think that as you start traveling and you start experiencing very different places and things, you start to realize perhaps how much you might like to change about your current life. And seeing that other people live very differently offers that possibility.
Well, I've got some good news for you, and the good news is that every one of my guests that have come on this show so far are people who are turning off the tube, getting off the couch, and getting out there and not only traveling the world, but making a difference in the world. And that's a theme that's becoming very strong through my show here. So it's showing to me that there's definitely a mindset of compassion, and I think traveling really breeds that when you get more respect for other cultures. And that's where I guess I was leaning to with my last question is once we start to respect each other, that cultural significant difference, then we can start to relate to, okay, I can do something here to make a difference. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I think that experiencing other cultures, it provides a point of contrast to what your normal is. And all of a sudden, with more points of information, you realize that the number of choices aren't black and white or A and B, they're limitless. What do you want to create in your life for health and happiness?
What do you say to somebody that says charity should begin at home, though, in terms of making sure you do something in your own backyard before you run off overseas to help people?
Well, the travelers on our first trip are all, looks like they will be all American except for one individual who's English. And she's included because she's a remarkable person. She has an amazing story. And eventually, I'd like to see this reach beyond the States. But it is primarily U.S. focused right now.
Okay. So, as I mentioned to you earlier, this podcast is going out to people in 82 countries across the world. If someone's sitting there and they know somebody who has cancer who would love the opportunity to be involved in this, is it too early for people to reach out to you from an international level, or how do you want to handle
No,
that?
please sign up on the website. We communicate. We're actually revamping a newsletter right now as we speak this weekend. So we'll be sending that out, not only with information about the most recent travel posts, but what's going on behind the scenes and what's happening. We're hoping for 2020, we'll be introducing video applications online so that people can start to apply. And if they don't actually get to go on that trip, they can always reapply in the future and live vicariously through the people who go. For the people who go, we're going to be streaming short snippets of film off the website. So you'll be able to binge watch by, say, your favorite traveler. You could binge watch by maybe food and culture or just by geography. And over time, what we'll be creating really is a documentary series that looks at different cultural perspectives on healing and health around the world. And we'll also be taking the films and repurposing them for medical education,
Wonderful.
continuing education.
Yeah, that's great. Do you have an idea around setting up other chapters of Cancer Road Trip in different countries around the world along lines like Room to Read has and John Wood in his program?
It could. Right now, I know we have to do certain things now to get the first one done successfully, and then move on from there. So while I can see a lot of paths to growth in the future, I don't focus on that. I focus on what's right in front of us now.
Yeah, you use the word we a lot. Have you got a team on board? Is there an army of helpers behind you at the moment?
There's all sorts of people.
Mm, mm,
There are web people. I have a director of development. I have a publicist. We're starting an ambassador program, a volunteer ambassador program, because we've had so much interest everywhere we go. We're going to open it up so that people can connect with with their immediate community, just to get word out about Cancer Road Trip and to let people know what's going on.
okay, I've got a strong global corporate network connected to this show. Is there specific support you require from the corporate world?
Yeah, we're going, we're talking to different corporations to come on to support this. Cancer, we're kind of a unique entity in that, like most films, we are structured as an LLC, and that's common in the film industry. Also common in the film industry is for you to find a fiscal sponsor. In our case, the New Mexico Film Foundation is our fiscal sponsor. That allows us to take tax deductible contributions, and they handle all the accounting and all the tax related information associated with that for us. So that's just a godsend. And we also retain the ability to structure corporate relationships. We've been building out the social media. I think we're around 16,000 on Instagram and Twitter each. And depending on the month, we reach anywhere from 600 to over a million people between those platforms. We'll be adding Pinterest soon. And I think that this will have value for our corporate sponsors, in addition to placement in the film, recognition, etc.
So a lot of organizations focus on raising money to not only create awareness around cancer, but also finding solutions and remedies for cancer patients. Does Cancer Road Trip have anything aligned to that part of the process?
Yeah, we are looking to have part of our proceeds go back into cancer research.
Okay, and that will be predominantly in the United States?
You know, that's a good question. I don't know. If we do a Cancer Road Trip Australia, for example, we'll most likely line up with with some Australian groups. That would make sense. Or
Okay.
if we do a Cancer Road Trip Europe, if we end up going that direction, that opens up other avenues as well.
Okay, brilliant. What have you actually learnt about yourself since you've started this additional process in your life? Has there been anything that's come out that you've sat down at night and go, gosh, I didn't know that I was.
Yeah, I've learned a lot about myself and I've worked a lot on myself. I've worked very hard on letting go of things and not dwelling on them. And that's not always easy. But I think once you do it a few times, it gets easier. But that's something I certainly I continue to work on. I've always been more of a visionary kind of person. One of my first jobs when I got out of school was dealing with industrial direct placements, essentially bonds, industrial bonds. And it allowed me to look at a lot of different industries from all sorts of different perspectives. And that being a generalist really suited me in a lot of ways. I am a generalist. I'm not somebody who will go super, super deep in just one thing. I'll go reasonably deep in a number of things.
Yeah.
So I think that this summer, I really took a little time off and I looked at what do I do well, what do I do terribly or not at all, and where do I need help. And that has led to bringing in some other, the publicist, director of development. I have somebody earmarked for some social media positions that I hope I'll be adding by the end of the year.
You sound like an extremely busy but organized woman. Are you running at the pace you used to run pre-cancer, or have you slowed down a bit since then?
I've slowed down a little. I sometimes take an afternoon nap, 20, 30 minutes, but it rejuvenates me and it gives me a full day. I get up really early, so I'm usually up by 5 or 5:30, so I put in a full day no matter what. And I'm very motivated. This isn't a job for me, this is a mission. And any bumps in the road, they don't faze me because I will find a way around them.
Where's Cancer Road Trip going to be in that vision in 10 years from now?
That's a great question. Actually, I'll do 5 and 10 years. 5 years from now, I want to have this up and running as a freestanding business. people in key positions so it can run without me. 10 years from now, and back to the 5 years from now, I really want to be the advanced guide, going out to the new places we're going to go, doing a lot of the legwork, writing about it, sending back video and things, and getting people excited about the next trip. 10 years from now, my goal with Cancer Roadtrip is to have it outlive me. I'd love to see this be a permanent fixture in the cancer community so that every 3 or 4 months, as a new trip rolls around, people can get excited about it. They can get excited about meeting the travelers, seeing where we're going, and really focusing a bit on what are they going to do with their lives now. Cancer is such a game changer for so many people that it's an opportunity, if you want to use it that way, to really reimagine your life.
Have you got an airline sponsor on board yet to help out with the travel segment of this?
We're talking to several companies right now, but we don't have anything signed, sealed, and delivered.
Okay, because I can imagine that would be a very helpful process in this. And the other question I had around the destinations that you're looking at people going to, how are they actually chosen? So is there some kind of a filtering process that goes on that, you know, some spiritual retreat in the north of Iceland is an ideal place to go, or how are they actually selected?
Well, actually, we get together and we talk about what might be an interesting. I bring in some of my cancer buddies,
Mm,
and we talk about what might make for an interesting trip,
mm.
and what are some of the themes we might want to emphasize, because every trip will be different.
So are you open to receiving ideas from my audience here who might be running, say, a facility somewhere that they think might be very well aligned to what you're trying to create here?
Oh, I'd love to.
Mm.
I'd love to talk to them. Absolutely.
Okay, well, I'll put that challenge out to anyone listening today. If you're involved in some kind of healing or retreat or destination where you think Pat and her crew should come to, or their travelers should come to, get in touch with us or get in touch with Pat through Cancer Roadtrip and let us know, because I'm sure there's a lot of amazing places out there that may not actually be on the radar today as places that people can go and heal themselves. Yeah, that would be really, really good. What advice do you give someone who's just being diagnosed today, Pat? What's your top 3 tips for someone that's just found out that terrible news that they've got cancer?
Take charge. First and foremost, take charge. You are now CEO of your own health, and you have to advocate for yourself in the system. You have to be knowledgeable about your disease and treatment options, and you need to put together a team of people who are going to help you, ranging from, on a personal side through your oncologist. You may want to find an acupuncturist. You may want to focus on diet. You need to get together this team, because these teams don't come pre-existing, and it's very difficult to do. So first would be take charge. Secondly would be get a handle on your stress. Figure out what works for you. You may not be able, if you play sports, you may not be able to play sports through chemo, or you may be able to. But find out what works for you and get a handle on your stress. And I would say try to stay as connected as you can. You're going to have relationships that surprise you and relationships that terribly disappoint you. And it's normal. This is what happens. Find the people that surprise you and make them and their good energy part of your life. Don't let any bad energy in. Get rid of it.
Brilliant advice. Now I'm gonna play devil's advocate, and I'm gonna ask you to share your top pieces of advice to family and friends who are connected to somebody that's just being diagnosed with cancer.
Just show up. Don't tell somebody what they need to do. Don't tell them about the newest, latest diet that's going to cure cancer or whatever. Just show up. And for friends, the thing that's so difficult about cancer and staying socially connected is you may not feel well, and it goes on for months and sometimes even years, and people get on with their own lives. To the friends out there, I would say, please remember the person going through treatment. All you have to do is send an emoji, send a quick note thinking of you, sending you good energy. Send something that isn't advice. Don't give advice, but just be there for that individual. That will mean more than anything.
What do you also say to the medical practitioners out there in the medical world about how they're currently going about treating cancer patients, and more importantly, the information they're providing to cancer patients?
I think doctors mean well. I think that I can only speak for the system in the States. I think they're overwhelmed by bureaucracy, legal concerns, standards of care. I think they have, and they are so busy that all they know is what their training has shown them. I think there's a bigger world than that, and some doctors are very threatened by it. So as a patient, you have to manage that one way or the other. I think that our medical system is very interventional. I think there are times when that is excellent and it's what you need, but I think you have to be thoughtful about it too.
I know the answer to this next question, but I'm going to ask you anyway. If you were to go back to the time when you were diagnosed, would you do anything differently than what you've done?
Probably not. I would like to. I would like to spare myself some of the difficulties I went through, but I managed everything well enough, and it turned out well enough that it was okay. Because of the type of lymphoma that I have, there aren't a lot of treatment options. I have a very limited menu, so I have to make a decision if I go for traditional medical treatment, what I do off of that menu. And then on the side, I took my health very seriously. I totally changed my diet. I started meditating. I got rid of negative energy left and right in my life. And I think all those things have made a difference.
Brilliant. What what do you think the future holds for you in the next 12 months in terms of, if we were to sit down and do the show again in 12 months, which I hope we actually do, what are you going to say to me, Mark, in the last 12 months, this is what I actually got to achieve?
Oh, let's do that,
Yeah.
because in 12 months we'll be having our first cancer road trip. I hope
I'm
I
not
have
trying to
several.
hold you accountable, Pat.
No, no, that's okay. Listen, that's the schedule. I'm doing my best to make this happen. I think we all are. One of the things I have had to do, I have to say, with this project is I've had to be a little to let myself off the hook a little bit in terms of an ambitious schedule, and I've had to realize that there are just building blocks to this project, and you have to get through the first layer, and then you can address the second layer, then you can address the third layer, and they all take more time than you think. But I think I have a pretty good group of people working with me now, and we are all shooting for this first trip to be in the fall of 2020. And
Okay,
then after
brilliant.
that, probably two trips in 2021. And then I'd like to ramp up to either 3 or 4 the following year. I have to see how much work it is. I'm hoping that we can form almost a template that will make this, it has to stay interesting, but it will make it easier to reproduce over time.
Is the I've just something that's just come into my mind and listening to you talking about this is, are the trips also open to family members of the person with cancer?
No. And there's a
No.
reason for that. We want to
Mm.
get people out of their comfort zone.
Yep.
This is a trip about you.
Mm.
And it's not about your relationships or your family. It's about you, and it is strictly for you.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, that's brilliant. Okay, good. Well, listen, it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you today. I love not only the vision but also the work you're doing, because you've already inspired a global community on social media to get behind you and support you. But you've also identified, as we already know, there's a huge, I guess, community out there. There's a tribe out there that are all touched by this horrible disease. And you're one of the leading lights that are really helping people not only overcome it, but change their lives and get onto the new you. What is it that's changed your life so much in the last 4 or 5 years in this journey? And what do you fear today about the future, if anything?
I don't fear much. I think I passed fear a long time ago. I think the thing that has changed my life most has been a meditation practice. I've learned to
Mm.
just watch events, watch things flow around me. It almost like it happens in slow motion sometimes. And it has been an absolute godsend. If there was one thing in my life I could not live without, it would be meditation.
Thank you for saying that, because not only have I actually had a guided meditation session on this show before from one of my guests, but I'm a strong advocate of meditation myself. And whilst I don't preach too hard about it, because I believe it's important for everybody to find their own pathway, I do say that meditation is absolutely something that can open new doors in your life. And it's great to hear you speak about that. So thank you for sharing that part too, Pat.
Yeah, I'm very grateful to have found that. I'm grateful to have segmented my life into a much healthy. I thought I had a healthy diet before, but I was just uneducated. It's been quite an education in terms of learning what really creates an anti-cancer diet, if you will. And it's a little bit different for everybody. But I think that all these changes are very doable for any of us, but it just takes time.
And I guess in saying that, don't put too much pressure on oneself to change too quickly, because everybody does it at their own pace. But it's important to start somewhere.
Start somewhere. At one point, I got really aggressive about it and I went vegan. And I felt great. But I realized life without cheese was not worth living. So, so I reintroduced a little bit of dairy, but doing that made me realize how much dairy I consumed, and dairy tends to be inflammatory. So I cut it way back. I eat more goat cheese, which I love anyway. It was a great education on many levels.
So it sounds to me as though the journey has also been exactly that. It's been an educational pilgrimage to some extent, about you finding out about yourself and what works for you, and across the whole spectrum of diet, of spirituality, of everything. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and that's one of the things I wish for people, for them to find the balance that is right for their path. If you look across the U.S., and the numbers vary a little bit by country, almost 40% of us will have a cancer diagnosis in our lifetime. I think the number's up to almost 50% in the UK now. This is extraordinary. This isn't a minor problem. This is an epidemic. And I think it goes to a lot of the choices we make in terms of how we craft our lives. One of the things I would hope to give people is a sense of, you can craft your life. What do you want to do? Change can be scary, but change can also be exhilarating.
What do you think actually ignited your cancer within you?
I think for me, it was social dislocation. I'd gone through a really difficult divorce. I'd moved across the country to the Lake Tahoe area because I was flying sailplanes, and it's one of the best places in the world to fly. And the sailplane community is, the guys really don't want women flying planes. So there were a whole bunch of, I think, issues that stacked up for me. And I think that sense of dislocation was really hard on my immune system.
It's always interesting to hear what people think of their, I guess, where it all started. And it can be different for everybody, of course, again. That's something that's quite unique to every cancer patient, I guess, in a lot of ways as well.
I think it is, and I think that's one of the reasons why my crusade, if you will, focuses on some of the issues certainly that I've been through, but they're common to many people. I've done hundreds of interviews at this point and talked to many, many people, and a lot of the issues that we all face are things that we have in common, and people don't need to feel isolated or alone. I hope they'll want to plug in to Cancer Roadtrip for education, for inspiration, and to really look at what they want out of their own lives.
Pat, I think that's a great place to leave it today. I'm going to put all the links to your sites in the description of this podcast so that anybody listening, whether they be a potential corporate supporter, whether they be a existing cancer patient, or whether they be a compassionate soul who wants to reach out and do something good to give back, let's hope they can all find you at Cancer Roadtrip. And that I'm really keen on having you back in 12 months' time when we can talk about how things are evolving. But more importantly, we can also check up on you to make sure your health's okay and you're still out there inspiring the rest of the world with your journey. Pat Wetzel, thank you very much for coming on my show today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Wonderful. We'll speak soon. What an incredible woman with an incredible vision. That's been Pat Wetzel on the Global Travel Channel podcast show today. If you know someone who's got cancer, or you've been a supporter and a carer for someone with cancer, then please reach out to Pat and support her Cancer Roadtrip vision and organisation, because this is going to be something that's going to change the lives of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people around the world. And I'm sure any support that we can pass on to Pat will be gratefully received. I hope you've enjoyed this particular episode on the Global Travel Channel podcast show as much as I've enjoyed bringing it to you. Don't forget, you can get your dose of other episodes on our website by visiting www.globaltravelchannel.com. And if you want to download the episodes, you can get them all from iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Play, and a host of other locations that are all listed on our website. And don't forget, if you enjoy our content, share it with your friends and family members. The more people we can have listening to the Global Travel Channel podcast show, the better, as we try to inspire as many people as we can around the world to go and travel and experience different things in life. Okay, that's it for me on this particular episode. My name's Mark Philpott. Until we meet again, I wish you all bon voyage.